Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild Adventurers League module Window to the Past, designed by Alan Patrick for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, and Rodney. And gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos David Vicente Gilberto, Sean A.K. Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, and Arash. Thank you all very much for your support. Now, I do not have any experience with the Adventurers League. I know about it. I know how it works, the reason that it exists. It's not something that I have done, nor do I necessarily even have a whole lot of interest in at this point. I am somebody that prefers meteor campaigns and character developments, and obviously you can tell by our streams how we like to play D&D, and doing an Adventurers League I don't think would jive with that. But I also have the privilege of somebody that has access to a group of friends that gets together every week, and I realize a lot of D&D fans or tabletop RPG fans in general don't have that. So for the reason that you can show up at a convention or at a game store with a character sheet in hand, I think the Adventures League is awesome for that, for sure. I have not reviewed a whole lot of Adventures League material, however, so this is probably one of the first that I'm actually going to look at, despite, again, being very aware of the Adventures League and obviously having that being a thing that exists for quite some time. Window to the Past is a Tier 2 adventure, which means levels 5 through 10, although it can actually scale up to Tier 4 really without a whole lot of difficulty, which is kind of shocking. But just with a few minor adjustments, you can actually scale it to pretty high level. Now, Adventures League is going to kind of change the way that I would compare this adventure to some other adventure. So, for example, it's going to be in black and white, printer-friendly formats. Not a lot of art. It's going to use the, actually, I don't know about the rules, about the standard rules document or not, but it is designed. I know a big part of the Adventures League is they are all designed to be able to be fully played and completed, start to finish, in about 4 or 5 hours. The idea is you show up for a session, at a convention or at a game store. It's a scheduled thing. And usually you're playing with, people you might not even know. But the idea is you show up, you do the adventure, and you complete it. So that's a big deal, and that definitely colors how all of these adventure, I'm going to call them modules because it gets weird saying Adventurers League adventure, how all these modules are designed, which is you got to be very careful about how much combat you include, how much introduction that you have, the fact that you just have to be able to throw all the characters into it. There's not going to be a lot of character development because of that. You might not be able to tie things into any specific character from the party. All of these things are factors that I keep in mind when I'm reviewing something from the Adventurers League. So stuff that I might normally complain about that's not here, that's not an adventure, I might be more lenient on this one because it's specifically designed for a certain format, and that format is the Adventurers League. I just want to get all of that out of the way first before we jump into the review. I'm generally pretty positive about this one. It focuses on, with the little bit of art that's here in the middle, Chaos, which is the really cool, undead, worm-infested, just nasty, evil god. And it's very highly thematic for that. It's got a really cool final boss battle, one of the probably better designed final boss battles that I've seen. Very classic, you need to stop a ritual from happening, and it's got cool rules for that. It's got a really neat dungeon design, at least from the outside. It's got a really cool description when you first get there. It's really awesome. It reminds me almost of this is a weird callback, but to the first Alien versus Predator movie, when they go underground and they see this massive structure. Was it? I think it was underground. It's the training, where predators train for, and they release aliens and stuff. That's an okay movie, by the way. But it was that kind of coolness, like it's that dug too deep. You go down there and you explore these ruins, and it just looks cool from the outside. But once you actually enter the dungeon, it's just kind of okay. There's not actually a lot going on, and I get that part of that is because it's an AL League adventure and it can't be too big. But it really does feel like it's a little more sparse than I would have liked. So that's a complaint that I have. Um, what it does do very well is provide a lot of welcoming advice for new DMs, which is, again, something that I don't know if all AL adventures include this stuff. If they do, then that's fantastic. Or if this is just specifically this designer including all these things, but it's very, very useful information. It has a rundown of like basically how the Adventures League works, what kind of information you need to know, how to adjust the adventure for different levels, how the APL thing, which is the average party level, and how to scale it. So how you should look at scaling things depending on where all your characters end up falling. Because a lot of times if people are bringing different characters, they're all actually going to be different levels. You actually have to come up with the average of everyone. Different spell casting services you can get, and just really good general advice on how to run a campaign in general. So it's very good. I mean, it's the first 5 or 6 pages of this adventure are just very, very welcoming, friendly advice to new DMs specifically, but also DMs that might not be totally familiar with how the Adventures League stuff works. Now, you can comfortably ignore a lot of this if you just want to run this as a adventure outside of the Adventures League. That's totally fine, but it is very nice to see. But it's something to keep in mind. It's a 65-page document, but the only adventure itself is maybe like 20 or 30 of those pages. I haven't actually looked at it, but it's bookended by a lot of appendices. There's some maps at the end, and then the beginning has this whole introductory aspect. So you see it as 65 pages. It's not actually that big of an adventure. It's still an AL-sized adventure. The adventure hooks is a good example of something that I would balk at this adventure for being very weak, but because it's an AL adventure, I'm going to kind of give it a pass. Because again, I don't, how do you bring characters from an Adventures League together? They might have been all part of different parties. Who knows what they did last? Like it's a very weird concept to try and even bring characters together. So you just kind of have to throw everybody in and say, okay, here's where you are, here's your situation, and we're going. We don't have time to putz around on this. So the adventurers hook here are basically like you're working for Thay, which is odd because Thay, even without the meta knowledge of the Forgotten Realms, like in-universe characters would probably know that Thay is not a good organization to work for. They are like slavers and evil wizards and all that. So most good aligned characters would not want to work with Thay. So that's already kind of a hard sell. And one of the ones is like you're born in Thay, or your god or faction send you to Thay because there's bad stuff going on there. It's not very good Adventurers hook. But again, I'm going to give it a pass because it's an Adventurers League intro, and that's kind of hard enough. The actual initial introduction, once everybody's in Thay to start with, there was an expedition that was sent out to explore some Netherese ruins, which is this ancient fallen empire in the Forgotten Realms. And they dug too deep, and something bad happened, and only 2 of the expedition force came back. They're both in really bad shape. They're dying from critical wounds. One of them is, I think, catatonic, and the other one is just spouting like gibberish. And it's up to the PCs to basically use either Arcana checks or nature checks or medicine checks. They can talk to the people around them. And there's all kinds of spells they can use, And the text here actually says, like, if the characters use detect magic or identify, then this happens. If they use telepathy, then this happens, which is actually really impressive that the designer tried to essentially stay one step ahead of all the players. And a big reason the designer actually says on the store page is they've run this adventure like dozens of times, so they're pretty well versed in like how people can react. So that's very interesting that you can gain just from that many. It's not even play tests at that point; it's just plays. But you can gain that much insight on how players will react to certain things, which is cool to see. And it's just a neat introduction. I like this part where the players can kind of discover what went down, and then talk to the Thayan wizard, who seems like a fun kind of gregarious kind of politician type character as the quest giver. So all of this Act 1 is basically pretty solid, which is good because it's really the only opportunity for role playing that players have in the adventure, which I think is pretty normal for an AL adventure. It's very much a strict Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And Act 1 is typically, your quests. You get your quest in Act 1. So that's when you can get your supplies. You can discover what you need to do. You can talk to the people. And the text even mentions like, the players can have fun here if they want, but keep track of the timetable, because if they spend too long here, it's going to be harder to get through the actual meat of the adventure, which is a dungeon crawl. So Act 2 is basically this dungeon crawl, and I guess Act 3 is just the final battle, if you could consider that. So I like Act 1. I think it's pretty solid and well done. Act 2 is the dungeon crawl, so it's a very much a quick montage to even get there. There's no random events or anything. Again, we're on an Adventures League timetable. We can't be screwing around with random encounters or combat or anything like that. So we get to the underground. We get to the dig site, which is under this glacier. You crawl down this hole, and there's this big dome underground with this giant inverted pyramid sticking out of it, which is a really cool giant structure. And it's got this crazy kind of magical zone called a mythal that fucks up a lot of different spells and makes like healing only work half, and basically creates a really crazy challenging area, particularly for spellcasters and defensive spellcasters. So that's pretty interesting. But once you get inside, it's just kind of okay. Like, there's a neat part where you have to basically sacrifice some blood or try to create water if you can, because it says it drains all your water and food when you get inside, in order to access the actual stairs to get to the pyramid. That's the closest thing it has to like a puzzle, I guess. There's no traps whatsoever. And then once you go up these stairs, you basically can just walk from room to room. I need to kind of skip ahead. Unfortunately, the maps are at the end, so I'm going to have to skip because it's easier for me to talk when I've got a map in front of me. By the way, full color grid maps. Yay! So often I do not get good quality maps that we can actually play with, and I really, really appreciate it, especially because Adventures League a lot of times doesn't have maps that we can play on, because, again, who has the time? You're just sitting there at a table playing in the 4 hours time period. But I really appreciate that there are maps of like all the different rooms and situations. In fact, there's an overarching map of the this is the base level of the pyramid, and then we've got like zoom ins of the different sections, which is nice to see. But it's kind of samey. It's weirdly large, but there's not actually a lot going on. There's one battle with wraiths in one of the prison cells. Otherwise, you just kind of wander around a lot of empty areas. I guess you could repeat the same wraith battle everywhere, but that seems like a terrible idea to just repeat the same combat encounter. Again, we're on a timetable with Adventures League. There's some libraries you can peruse the books and get some more information. There is a neat little Easter egg with if your players have a one of the sentient weapons from Horde of the Dragon Queen. There's a cool part where you get some expanded lore on that, because apparently, again, the designer discovered that a lot of people had that weapon from Horde of the Dragon Queen from that AL series. So that's a neat thing, although it's obviously that's a couple of years old now at this point, so probably not so much now, but it is neat to see that. The whole point is to get to these two stairs on the side. One of them goes to level 2, the other one goes to level 3. From what I can tell, I don't think there's actually a reason to even go to level 2. It's just kind of an area with an extra fight with some Spawn of Caius, which is this lab. Actually, it's this one, the lab, the harness level, where they can possibly get some mithril armor. And then level 3 is the actual final climactic battle, which I guess is this one. We don't actually have a color version of this one yet. The Writhing Battery. This is really cool. So as much as this dungeon is a little bit, it's just disappointing because it's such a neat looking thing. When you get in there, it feels really cool to start exploring, but then it just, once I was reading it, it didn't actually seem all that interesting unless your players are really keen on discovering like old lore on the Netherese Empire and kind of what they were doing here, which is about this like was it 10th school of magic or maybe 10th spell level or something, a chronomancy and all this other stuff. It's interesting stuff, but it didn't feel like that dynamic and interesting of a place to explore. The dungeon itself isn't like, it's just a bunch of hallways, and it's like large hallways with not a lot going on, so it's not actually that cool from the inside. I was a little disappointed with how sparse it was. However, the final battle is really, really neat. I'm going to go back to the text on this, which is you get to the top, the Writhing Battery. So Caius was imprisoned by all these different, I forgot what they're called, dark obelisks, called a Writhing Battery here. and it's a cool like theme where you go in the dungeon, you keep hearing this thumping, and it's literally the beating of the god trying to escape his prison. And you get to the top, and of course you catch at the perfect moment where there's a ritual of the different spawn of Caius, which I think were morphed from the previous expedition, are engaged in a ritual to try to free the aspect of Caius, which is a CR-25 giant god. Like, it's crazy. Um, and there's a really neat fight with some good rules on how to engage it, which is 6 of them attack the party. The other 6 work to free the god. And for everyone that's still there chanting, you mark off damage to the cell, the prison cell, and the cell starts with 50 hit points. So there's an interesting, and there's 6 of them still chanting. So you can kind of do the math on how many rounds remaining, but if it takes more magical damage, it loses more health. So maybe some, AoE attacks would not be a good idea for the party. And if the thing actually breaks, then you got to deal with a CR-25 god, and then you're in deep shit. So I just think that's a really neat flavor. It's cool. It's like this rooftop battle at the top of this inverted pyramid. There's a really nasty like cloud of just worms above you and below you. It's all necrotic shit going on, and that mythol thing is happening. So it's doing a lot of stuff to your magic. It feels like a really climactic, epic moment that's I wasn't expecting from something like an AL League adventure. I expect very much run of the mill, just standard, cave dungeons and that kind of thing, which I guess maybe I just haven't read enough good AL adventures to be impressed by them. But this is one of the most impressive ones just from a sense of like, oh, we're going to this like underground Netherese ruin all the way to the top, and we might even end up fighting Caius at the end because he is being freed. Like, that is really pretty crazy and memorable for an AL League adventure. So I thought that was really neat. And I like the final battle rules quite a bit. And like the beginning, which has a lot of good advice for DMs, it also has really good appendices. It's got the NPC summary, a whole appendix on how to properly run that final battle with layer actions and regional effects. It's got some more background lore, including this is Hazaron is the item from Horde of the Dragon Queen, which is really cool. It's got, of course, all the NPC stat blocks that we need, as well as the maps and notes on Caius himself. By the way, yeah, I said CR-25. Caius is a god and cannot be scaled up or down. You should be going nuts with that thing if it actually gets free. So I think it's very, very well done. I wish the dungeon itself were a little more interesting. I get that because it's an AL adventure, we can't do too much. Time is of the essence. You got to keep things moving. You want to wrap things up in 4 to 5 hours, which is a pretty long, D&D session, but that's kind of the standard of what an Adventures League can be. I just wish it was a little more interesting. I wish there was a puzzle somewhere. I wish there was a trap or something, just something to make things more interesting. If this dungeon were a fourth of the size, but each room had something new and interesting to look at and explore and have happen, I think that would have actually been an improvement rather than just this cool structure that looks cool as hell from the outside when you get in, but then when you get in, it's actually not. It just didn't feel like it was that interesting to me. The black mass doors are kind of cool. They have to like wiggle out of the way as you walk by and all that, but it just doesn't amount to a whole lot of interest for me. So, but I like the final battle quite a bit. And I like all the AL stuff that surrounds it. So let's go over my pros and cons for Window to the Past. Pro, it's an official Adventures League module. That's should be useful for some folks. I think it's an older one, if I had to guess. I believe it was actually written during or designed during Prince of the Apocalypse because it mentions the Devastation Orbs. And I think that was the idea. And obviously it talks about an item from Horde of the Dragon Queen. So, but it doesn't, lean too hard into like, oh, the elemental cults are doing their thing right now. It doesn't do that, which is nice. So it makes it more timeless. But just the fact that it's AL legal and official can be a very nice boon for people that like to play those adventures or want to just experience one. Pro full color grid maps. Yes, thank you so much. It appears that when this one was originally designed, it did not have color maps. It just had black and white maps. So I'm glad that we got color maps in the end where I could actually use these maps. I don't think we actually get them as separate player handouts though, which is very, very odd. I got like some of them with my copy, but I don't think I actually got separate, like, I don't think I got separate versions of all of these, so you might have to actually copy and crop and do all that, but we do have, at least the maps do exist. Pro, helpful DM notes and appendices for running the adventure. As I mentioned, the first 5 or 6 pages and then the final 10 or 15 pages, all really good content. It's all very helpful for running the adventure for new DMs, for new DMs to the Adventures League, and just helpful for running this adventure in general. Pro, epic final battle. It's a really, really cool battle. The other battles, there's a battle with Wraiths and another battle with Spawn of Caius you can have in the laboratory, are both technically optional. You can just not run into them because of the way the dungeon is designed. But this final confrontation is very, very awesome. And you actually get a rod of security right before it. You take it to like open the final door. So you could just escape. You could piece out of it if you're really hurting and maybe your team's just not good at combat or just don't want to fight this fight. So that is totally an option. You can actually end up not even battling it because, you know, who wants to fuck with possibly having to fight a god? And I totally get that. Pro, it scales up to tier 4, which is really crazy. Not a lot of adventures scale that far. It's still primarily designed for tier 2, which at that point, you very much hope you're not fighting Chaos, whereas the upper levels, you could probably actually fight him. That would be a pretty fun fight. But just with a few adjustments with, obviously, the creatures that are involved in the battle, because, again, there's no traps, there's no, you know, not a whole lot of encounters, so it's actually pretty easy to scale it up. And because you might be fighting a god at the end, that part doesn't change. So it does scale up pretty impressively. Cons, there's almost no art. That's, I think, a symptom of it being an AL League adventure, but it is a bummer to go through just the, you know, the black and white text is one thing, you know, the background and everything. It's still nicely formatted. There's no typos or anything like that. But, you know, we don't get the nice, lovely pages or the art or the, you know, sepia tone, all that. It's a bummer that you go through page after page after page after page, just have no art. And the other con is the dungeon design. I think it's nicely large. It looks great from the outside, but it is just too sparse for my taste. There's not a whole lot of interesting things going on to justify the amount of exploration the party can do. It's just kind of empty hallways and some books you can look at. Yeah, you could get into the lore aspects, but I just wish there were like a puzzle or a trap or something a little more involved and some more interesting, different kinds of rooms rather than just here's the north cell, here's the south cell, here's the eastern stairwell, here's the western stairwell, that kind of thing. Final verdict. The Worm That Walks returns in an epic and memorable showdown in AL Adventure Window to the Past. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.